Good morning, everybody. This is Stephen Patrick from the University of Georgia College of Ag and Environmental Sciences, bringing an update today from a slideshow we presented at the Southern Division meeting for the American Fisheries Society a few weeks back. And it was an online meeting, and the format there allowed for about 15 minutes, and the recording quality wasn't the greatest, so I thought I would take a time to run through this today and hopefully give you guys a little more insight. You can see there on the screen a lot of partners are involved in this project. You'll hear a lot of names and see a lot of things, but the main point we want to get through here is that this has been a volunteer-led project with anglers collaborating with all the partners you see on the screen to really capture fish, collect solid quality data, and do some analyses on some fishes that the Department of Natural Resources has not had a chance to really have access to evaluate this fishery and to try to get some insight about what's happening. Integration is a big question all across the southeast, really across our nation, when it comes to introducing fishes to bodies of water where they're not supposed to be. And we wanted to see what was happening on our fishery. There's a lot of folks concerned about Alabama bass integration, and let's just walk through the slides. So as I said, we've got a lot of partners that have been volunteering. Some of these folks are university professors, a lot of Department of Natural Resources employees, guides, Unicoi outfitters, lots of community volunteers, and a lot of student chapters of the American Fisheries Society plugging in. So I've been really excited to meet all these folks and spread the message of what we're doing and kind of dispel some thoughts that some folks may have. A lot of folks come into research projects like this with preconceived notions, and something I've always been about my entire career is letting the data speak for itself. You want to collect solid data. You want to learn what you can from that data, educate folks, and move forward, trying to have a firm handle on what might actually be going on, but also being humble enough to realize that you're only as good as your data, and you always need more data. So we're going to continue to collect data and try to figure out what's happening and continue to give updates. This isn't the end all, and isn't the definitive word on exactly what's happening, but it's our best guess based on the data that we have so far. So the first thing we need to really familiarize ourselves with is that in our drainage on the upper Chattahoochee Basin, when we're talking about really above Mossy Creek, going all the way to Helen, we have four primary bass species. We have a few largemouth, we have shoal bass, which are native, Chattahoochee bass, which are native, and also Alabama bass, which are non-native. They've been introduced into Lake Lanier as early as the 1970s, and they've moved their way up the river all the way to Helen, to that grist mill dam right there at right there across from Habersham Winery. I can't remember the name of the mill now that I'm slipping. I'm sorry about that. But they've made it all the way up, as far as they can go. Hopefully they'll never pass that point. If they do, Chattahoochee bass are definitely in trouble. So the known threats we have for some of our native black bass species are habitat alteration, fragmentation, and integration. And when you think about habitat alteration, you've got a lot of development going on in the watershed in Northeast Georgia, and that's one of the key factors that we're going to look at as we shift over to the Chestatee, where City of Dahlonega is a little bit larger. There's a little bit of mining impact and quarry impact. There's a lot more sediment on the Chestatee than there is on the Upper Chattahoochee, and we want to see what's happening there in terms of habitat alteration. Fragmentation especially comes with the Chattahoochee bass, where they've got some pure populations above some barriers, and those populations are scattered out and no longer connected. When they're no longer connected, if something happens to that individual population, they can be eliminated rather quickly. And one of the threats to their elimination is integration. We've been seeing some integration from Alabama bass, which are non-native, and some integration from shoal bass, which are native. And those introgress fish on the Chattahoochee bass side are definitely a big concern for us, and we're trying to investigate what we can do to protect and salvage what Chattahoochee bass we have there. So our study really was to help fill a data gap for the Department of Natural Resources, and what we were after is looking at the species compositions above, Lake Lanier for bass species. We wanted to look a little bit at range and movement, try to figure out how far up the river they go, and if they move around a lot. Do they move seasonally or do they stay put? And like we said, all the way through, we've been looking at the genetic composition and the prevalence of hybrids and introgress fish. So what is integration? Integration is the movement of genes from one species to another through repeated spawning and backcrossing of an interspecific hybrid with one of its parent species. And this is a picture of a Chattahoochee bass that's probably getting a little bit of a compliment from some shoal bass, which, like we said, native shoal bass and native Chattahoochee bass do cross and do have some level of integration there at times, and that's considered natural because they're both native to the system. But we're also seeing integration where you get a mixture of the Alabama bass with the Chattahoochee bass, and potentially Chattahoochee bass that have already crossed with shoal bass, and that leaves the pure Chattahoochee bass genetics in peril wherever they exist with the other two species. So it's very difficult for these guys to overcome that level of integration, and that's what we're concerned about. And initially we were concerned also, was there integration between Alabama bass and shoal bass? That's one of the big questions that anglers have, because most anglers are after the shoal bass and they're not necessarily after the Chattahoochee bass. But we're trying to educate folks about what's available in the system and maybe change some of that mentality so that folks can appreciate all of our native fish species. So what triggers integration? Usually integration is triggered by non-native bass species, and we have seen a little bit of smallmouth bass integration in the Chattahoochee. We have seen some spotted bass, Kentucky spotted bass, and what a lot of anglers call spotted bass are actually Alabama bass, especially in this drainage. So most of the integration is coming from Alabama bass. Like I said, when you see the slide later, you'll see a little bit of spotted bass contribution. You'll see a little bit of smallmouth contribution, and we're not sure exactly where that comes from, whether folks are introducing individual fish, which is a no-no. We want to say as many times as possible in this presentation, we don't want fish coming from other places if they're not native to the basin, because whenever you start doing that, you start completely changing the dynamics of genetics forevermore. And it's hard to fix that. So we want to keep bass where they're supposed to be. The other thing that can trigger integration is habitat degradation. Can those fish get to suitable spawning habitats? Are those spawning habitats fragmented and spread it out? Are they sedimented in where they're no longer viable source, places to spawn, and that pushes all the fish to spawn in a particular area? What is happening in regards to habitat? And that's what we talked about. Comparing the Chattahoochee and the Chestatee samples will be very interesting. Hydropower is definitely a factor farther south in the basin. Hydropeaking and thermal suppression can keep those fish, a little too cold, and maybe they won't spawn at all. And later on, they could get a little bit warmer in the summertime, and then all spawn at once due to the product of hydropeaking causing just a short, small window when all those bass spawn. So that could be an implication for integration farther downstream. But like we said, we don't have any hydropower, hydropeaking facilities on these waters up north of Lake Lanier. So that's not an issue for us. One issue that is very big on my mind is stormwater. We're starting to see, warm water flashes from summertime storms. We're seeing extreme velocities from some of these hurricane and early spring and then late winter storms. We've got a lot more flooding here lately, and we have had 3 or 4 years of record rainfall, and that's contributing to it as well. So, we're really worried about, as our community develops more and more, we need to restore some connectivity to the floodplain. We need to talk about repairing riparian buffers and protecting the habitat as much as possible. Because I really feel like for us, stormwater is going to be a major issue moving down the road in terms of protecting these fish. So what we did is we tried to break out the Upper Chattahoochee into a number of segments. We had volunteer crews collecting length, weight, fin clips on all bass species, and that study went from May to October each year from 2017 to 2019. You can see we started up as high as we could right below the gristmill dam in Helen, right there at the Indian Mound, and floated all the way down pretty much to Mossy Creek. We stopped at Mossy Creek because we felt like the DNR folks already have access with electrofishing boats below Mossy Creek and down there at Duncan Bridge, or not Duncan Bridge, Belton Bridge. And upstream on the Sequoia, we floated from Habersham Mills Lake down to Duncan Bridge. And we did prospect higher for different fish and also electrofished on Mossy Creek to try to get some samples as well. Above the mill dam, you don't really find any shoal bass. Alabama bass are scattered, and Chattahoochee bass are there as well, and do tend to see a lot of integration there, which is unfortunate. And really trying to look and evaluate sections where we can try to figure out how to protect those Chattahoochee bass, like we said. So when we started out the study, we were using alpha tags. Alpha tags are little small uh, tags that you can embed in the fish's tongue or in their mouth, maybe below their eye, and it goes up underneath the skin. And they were very difficult to read and tended to fall out. North Georgia Tech helped us do a study in 2018 over the winter and early spring of 18, and really figured out that the fish were losing those tags, and maybe we should shift to a hall print dart tag, which we did. And we also learned pretty quickly that some of those smaller fish couldn't handle some of those bigger tags. So we thought about buying some smaller tags, and you'll see some of those in the fish under 200 millimeters as we shifted over in 2019 to using some really small tags and some bigger ones for the shoal bass. So that's what they look like. You can see you kind of try to punch them in there near the dorsal fin, hopefully get them streamlined where they don't affect the fish in current, and hopefully they can heal over fast from that wound. What we did is took a fin clip. You can see me there in the picture taking a small clip of the fin to put in a vial of ethanol and collect those samples to send to Auburn University for analysis. If you want to read more, you can look at this paper in Conservation Genetic Resources and learn more about what exactly is going on when we send it to the lab. It's a quick and efficient way for us to get back genetic results on the fish and hopefully get some answers. And that's what we hope to use on the chested T as well. So in 2019, you can see we put a lot of effort into trying to catch a variety of fish species. You can see what we called hybrids. What we felt like were hybrids were about 3% of the catch. You can see there's very limited largemouth. You can see some Chattahoochee bass, some Alabama bass, and the shoal bass. 2018, the numbers look pretty well the same. Uh, your Alabama bass numbers went down a little bit, and we did have a few more shoal bass showing up in our sampling. A little bit, a little bit more Chattahoochee bass. I guess I got those things flipped up because it's 2017 to 2019. So shows you there's a little bit of variation in our catch rates, and some of that is attributed to angler effort and the type of number of anglers that were there, and just the availability of floating certain sections. I know initially we couldn't get to that Indian Mound down to 255 stretch, or really to Chickamauga Creek very often without it flooding. We caught a bunch of high water events that first year, so got a little bit more Chattahoochee bass, or in the later years. For us, on each section, we try to get 100 fish per section each year. The weather seemed to play a big factor. Like I said, when you had falling muddy water or high water, angling effort was pretty difficult. Uh, for me, I tend to do a lot better when the water's clear, when the water's been stable for quite a while. And you can catch fish when it's on the rise, but once it's rained and once things get muddied up, I feel like those fish feed really heavy right as the water rises, and then as it starts to fall, they're resting and hiding from really the velocity of the stormwater event. Looking at proportional stock density and size distribution, you can see there we've got a pretty nice bell curve. We've got pretty good standard proportional stock density data. It would be interesting to see how well electrofishing data compares to this, to see did the anglers truly catch a representative sample of the population, or did they automatically select for larger fish? due to gear selectivity with larger baits and larger lures, what type of, fish population is actually there as compared to what we caught, with the angler records. Because you don't really see, too many really small fish. And I guess we did catch a few big fish, but, there's a pretty nice bell curve there, and I was pretty happy. So one day we'll get a raft, we'll do some electrofishing samples on this stretch and see how well this angler data can correlate and compare. One question we had was, can those fish move? Initially for me, I felt like I always like to fish high, way high in the basin, a lot higher than most of the tournament anglers, just to get away from competition, just to get away from seeing a lot of people, and I guess to keep the sunscreen off of me. Up higher in the basin, it's a lot cooler, a lot more shade, and maybe you don't catch as many fish folks feel like, and it's not as big a river. But to me, it's what I always have enjoyed, and for me, I wouldn't see fish showing up high in the basin until later in the season. And I always wondered, could they move? And was Smith Island a barrier? And our movement data is very limited, but we have seen, fish take that jump to where they're above and below Smith Island, for example. So there really aren't any barriers. We have seen fish moving. You can see there the maximum distance is about 6.8 miles in a little over a year. And it'll be interesting to see as we collect more and more recapture data, which you can help us with, how that goes along. Looking at the story there, you can see for Alabama bass, you see a lot of blue there. You see a lot of pure Alabama bass. And when I caught this fish that you see tagged and released it, I know there's a lot of folks around Columbus, a lot of those Flint River guys just really tore me up saying I should have killed that fish. I shouldn't have never put that fish back. Why am I tagging, releasing it? If I know it's an Alabama bass, I should kill it. And for me, like I said, I've wanted the data to speak for itself, to tell the story before we make management decisions. And really, it wasn't my place to make that management decision. And I often question as anglers, is it your place to make that management decision? For me, I'm going to defer to the biologist. Right now, the folks that I'm talking to the most are Hunter Roop, who's the biologist over this part of the river, and also Bryant Bowen, who's working on the Chattahoochee project. Chad and he are making some recommendations of what they think because as you see high there in the basin, you see a lot of integration showing up with Chattahoochee bass. As you move farther north, you see more and more integration between the Alabama bass and Chattahoochee bass, and that's very unfortunate, for our Chattahoochee bass, and we've got to devise a plan for how to conserve and protect them. But as far as integration with the shoal bass, you can see it's very limited. You can see there's a little bit of smallmouth, there's a little bit of spotted bass gene, a little bit of largemouth. There's a little bit of integration from a lot of different places, but not enough to really be significant. And for the most part, it says these guys are getting high in the basin, as Bud Freeman speculated, getting as high as possible, pushing that genetic as far up as possible. And if you're a Chattahoochee bass, it's bad news. But overall, it appears that Alabama bass and shoal bass are coexisting. Shoal bass is the same way. You can start to look here at this map, and you see very little integration in the shoal bass with anybody. So a little bit of Chattahoochee bass integration, and definitely interesting to see there. Over on the Chestatee, they've got some samples that look much different than our pie charts for the Chattahoochee. That sample size is very small. They're on 255 to 115, for example. We got 57 fish and very little to no integration. And over here on the Chestatee, you can see the sample size is two, but you've got significant integration with Chattahoochee bass and Alabama bass. And over on Yahoula, you just see tremendous Alabama bass integration with the shoal bass. So it's interesting to see with small sample sizes, will that play out? For Yahoula Creek, for example, you've got a lot of stormwater coming from the city of Dahlonega. You've got a reservoir that was constructed. You've got a lot of sediment. You've got a wastewater plant, water plant. It's a small creek, a lot of big stormwater surges. Are we going to see that pie chart play out to where Yahoula shows significant issues? Or is the sample size so small that we don't know what we're talking about and we're just speculating? That's the question for these studies, and that's what's happening here. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So we're going to spend a year over on the Chestatee, try to get 500 samples, try to get those clips ran really quickly so that we can get you some answers. Maybe not this time next year, but possibly by the following year, we'll have those answers in hand and know what to do in terms of managing these fish. Like we said, when you look at the overall purity, with dark green being the level of purity, you can see there up high, you've got some integration with Chattahoochee bass. Over on the Chestatee and Yahoo, you've got it. But for the most part, things look really good on the Chattahoochee, except for maybe right at the confluence. And if you've ever floated those stretches, right there at the confluence, you've got a lot of sediment going from right where the two forks come together for the Sequoia and the Chattahoochee, all the way down to Duncan Bridge, and maybe that is habitat related, and that's one of our canaries in the coal mine, for example. We've got to keep that habitat looking good for the fish to do well. When it looks to go to Chattahoochee bass, like we said, when I caught this fish on the 17 to 255 stretch, I sure was proud of it. And now looking back, it's probably a ingress fish that has a lot of contribution from either shoal or Alabama bass. And maybe I wasn't getting that 12 to 14-inch Chattahoochee bass like I thought, but still a lot of fun to catch. Our question now is to figure out, where do we have pure populations of Chattahoochee bass and how do we protect them from integration? Biggest way we can protect them from integration is to keep spreading the word like we are right here, is that Alabama bass have no place being stocked in any body of water. Honestly, shoal bass have no business being stocked in any body of water. I know there's a lot of folks talking about wanting to move them to the Altamaha, or are they in the Altamaha? Are they in the Oconee? Have they been moved there? Have they moved out of the Ocmulgee and proliferated up some of those other Atlantic slope drainages? We've got native bass species in all these rivers that are already there that we should appreciate. And doesn't matter what kind of fish it is, we should not be moving, species to a new basin, because it just totally changes the network and the system there forward. And it's very disappointing, to see that happen. So one of the things that I kind of cue in on is this kind of opportunity. The picture there in 2011 is a farm project that I used to drive by every day on the way to work, and the farmer there was concerned about a box culvert that was installed improperly. He had a really big whirlpool that was eating out the creek bank and really causing a big mess. The stormwater surge was tearing down the creek banks, and I'm going to admit that free choice livestock access was not doing any favors as well. But the one thing we have to think about and remember with all these farm projects is it's perfectly legal for a cattleman to water livestock in the creek. There's no real laws against it. It's a viable water source. We've been doing a water trough and drinking water study on livestock the last 2 years, and what I found for our streams up our way is that water flowing in the stream is actually better water, healthier water, cleaner water for those cows to drink than giving them a water trough. We've shifted a few folks over to water troughs by fencing them out of the creek, and now we've got issues with how do we bleach and keep those tanks disinfected? How do we keep that water quality as good as possible so that the cows aren't taking it on the chin for getting out of the creek and drinking tank and trough water? You may be laughing and thinking that's crazy, but we can share a lot of data on that side. But the thing you got to think about here is that whenever you ask a cattleman to fence out that creek, he's lost some grazing. He's giving up a viable water source that's very dependable, and you're asking him to drink out of a watering trough that he has to now maintain. Uh, there's questionability about whether that water quality is actually better than the stream. But it is nice to see in 2019 we've got canopy closure happening. We've got riparian buffer that's now protected. We've got fish species in that creek jumping from 2 to 3 species at best up to 16 to 18 species. And it's really cool to see that happening. So that's the kind of things that we're after. So the main point I wanted you to think about here is that we're going out and working with farmers and educating them, talking to them about the benefits to the river, to the water quality, to the bass species and offering them opportunities to improve their farms by installing heavy use areas for feeding hay, giving stream crossings for getting equipment from one side to the other on the farm. Uh, some of those stream crossings serve as watering ramps, and that's fine too. We've installed 27 wells, 153 water troughs, and got a lot of creek banks stabilized and a lot of livestock excluded. And then we look to establish some good plantings for critical areas to really stabilize the the riparian buffer and try to get folks thinking about how to manage their pastures better. And that's the one big selling point for the livestock side. They may give up a little bit in putting the cows on watering troughs, but when we start implementing rotational grazing, you can really start to get cattlemen to see the benefit there because the grass does a lot better. You got a lot of fencing within the farm. You do have the labor of moving those animals from paddock to paddock every few days, but if you let that grass recover, you can have excellent quality forage because the cows go into a small paddock. They eat everything. They eat the weeds, they eat the grass, they eat the high quality grass, the poor quality grass. They really clean up an area quickly. And then you move them off for a period of time and allow that grass to recover. When you look at slides of continuous grazing versus rotational grazing, it's really easy to teach cattlemen that this rotational grazing not only protects the watershed and helps water quality, but it provides better forage, more forage, and a lot less maintenance on the pastures because the cows are doing what they're supposed to do. And it's something that we really need to look into and learn a lot more about, if we're interested in water quality. Something else we're shifting into is evaluating sites like these. Uh, this is a site that has literally no riparian buffer. It's got stormwater issues coming two or three directions, and that channel is just continuing to incise. So we're looking for opportunities to try to stabilize some banks, to revegetate some banks, get some riparian buffers growing, and hopefully start to get folks here in Northeast Georgia really thinking about stormwater by stabilizing habitat one little bite at a time. And like we said, we're not looking to armor the banks. We're looking to possibly reshape some, but more importantly, to get vegetation established that can protect and hold that bank in place. And try to get folks. Folks are excited about pollinators and pollinator gardens and native vegetation, and it's a great learning opportunity. For example, like this site here at Piedmont College is, they have an environmental science program there to where it'll be an excellent teaching tool to talk about the species, to talk about the importance of the riparian buffer, and to see the change and document it. This creek right here drains into their wetland that they spend a lot of time and effort developing. And yeah, that wetland probably does filter that water and protects the river as it moves downstream. But why not just keep moving until you've got the entire basin, protected and covered? That's the idea and mentality that we're trying to spread. Another facet that we work on here in Extension is talking about, best management practices for gardeners. There's so many people that spend a lot of time and money trying to get their yard to look nice. And for me, a lot of folks seed fescue in the spring, they watch it die in the summer, they over fertilize it all summer trying to get it to grow. And all that fertilizer is just contributing to eutrophication in Lake Lanier. We need to think about how do we educate gardeners to save time and money, to make their yards beautiful, to give habitat for pollinators, to stabilize the watershed for protecting water quality. All these things go hand in hand. So we've been doing a lot of programming with master gardeners, a lot of programming with homeowners, and that's something that I do every day for my job is educating folks about how to take care of the things in their yard and how to think about growing things that will keep that ground in place. And for a lot of homeowners on the creek, it's like your stream bank is eroding because you removed all that riparian vegetation. Now, how do we get it back? Or how do we remove invasives like privet and get back native vegetation? There's a lot of things that go into best management practices, and we're focused on, like we said, stormwater in our municipalities. We're focused on the homeowners, and also focused on the livestock and agricultural producers. Another facet of the study that we've had going is for years and years, probably the last 8 to 10 years, we've been doing electrofishing surveys on every piece of creek we can find. Whether it's a little tiny, tributary that's maybe a foot wide, or like this sample here, where we're going up the main stem of the Sequoia up near Jackson Bridge. We're using North Georgia Technical College's environmental technology program to do the sampling, to give them hands-on experience, to give them interaction with the DNR personnel. And we're looking for diversity and presence of fish species moving up the basin to try to give folks an idea of what is under that bridge when you drive over. There's a lot more than just bass, trout, catfish, and bluegill. When you start thinking about it, when we started this, most of the folks felt like there might be, 12, maybe 15 species of fish in the Sequoia Basin, and nothing of real significance or importance. But when we start looking at the list, we've got 46 species confirmed. We're looking for a few additional species to add. We're always looking to see what we can do to evaluate diversity, to evaluate, what fish are there. And it's like at the restoration project I talked about earlier, we went from having 2 to 3 species to jumping up to 16 to 18 every year. And that was really exciting to see. So, expanding habitat for all these individual species and protecting them, and just really going to, you know, places like even teaching this to the Sequoia River Watershed Association. A lot of those folks were surprised that, they really thought, a lot of those guys maybe thought that trout were the dominant species there, and then they were, interested to figure out that our trout are actually an introduced exotic that should not be there. The brown trout and the rainbow trout are not native. They're not supposed to be in that basin. And what do we do there? And we need to get an appreciation for what's supposed to live there. And I guess I should go on this list and highlight what's not native. So I may go back and do that for the next presentation for fun. How many of these fish species are native fish species, such as the shoal bass, and how many are not, such as the Alabama bass? And for us, one thing that we do a lot of is trying to connect kids to the water. If you can connect kids and adults to the water, teach them a little bit about it, get a little bit more appreciation for it, I think moving forward, everybody will be a lot better off because they start to learn what's happening. They get a little more appreciation for what's in the watershed, and hopefully connect them to, farm and food camps, a prime example. We need those beef cattle producers producing meat so that we can have, nice juicy steak and hamburger at the grocery store. But you also need to realize that a lot of those guys are doing the best they can to protect the watershed. They're true stewards of the land and true examples for others across the nation to learn about, how to protect water quality. So there's not always all bad apples in the bunch, like the media likes to portray these days. It's either all or nothing, good or bad. And there's a lot of gray area there and a lot of opportunity for encouragement and education to make, our world a little bit better place. Our goals for 21 and 22 is to increase our recaptures on the Chattahoochee. We could use a little help with that if you guys want to get out. We want to develop some signage to try to educate some folks. Like on the Hardman Trail, I take Reagan there all the time, and you know, walking along that trail, it'd be nice to have a sign at all the entry points to educate folks about what native bass species are there, about the question of integration and Alabama bass, and just to do a little bit of, education to help educate folks what's out there so they can have a little more appreciation. For us, we're going to begin sampling on the Chestatee, hopefully in June, all through the summer months. I typically wait until the water warms up, get a little bit of drought, get a little bit of lower water, clearer water, and it's a little bit safer and warmer for volunteers to participate, and just a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll have, we've got one, two, three, about 6 or 7 sections on the Chestatee. We do each of those at least twice. That'll be 14 floats this summer. And like I said, if we can do those floats and get about 500 bass for the Chattahoochee or the Chestatee Basin, we'll be doing a lot of good there. The dam down to Coppermine is, I don't know that, I guess we'll try to make sure we've got permission to have access there. The upper Chestatee down to the Chestatee will probably have some permission issues we'll have to work through, but the Coppermine to 52, 52 to 60, 60 to the public takeout, and Yahoula are all pretty much, on water that's publicly accessible, so we shouldn't have any trouble there. And we'll just work our way up through the basin and see how we do collecting those samples. So what can you do? If you're out fishing and you catch a fish, look for a tag. Submit that tag over the Facebook page or call Hunter or Mark Rigglesford there at the Gainesville office for DNR. Biggest thing we've said 10 or 12 times in this presentation is to encourage other people not to move fish to new waters. I guess that's, one where, as a kid, I used to love fishing Lake Chattooga for largemouth, big largemouth and beautiful smallmouth bass. And now when you go, you catch pretty much all Alabama bass. It's not what we want to see when we have some of these treasured resources available to us on the regular. We want to protect them, and the way to do that is to not move fish where they're not supposed to be. Encourage anglers and really anybody about the importance of protecting the resource. Trying to release some of those shoal bass and Chattahoochee bass, even the Alabama bass, I would even say. Take care of the resources. Try to figure out how to encourage folks to protect the watershed, and come out and volunteer. You can help us collect data, like we said on the Chestatee. We won't be tagging on the Chestatee, but we will be taking fin clips and putting them in the vials, like you see there on the top of this picture. Once again, we want to thank everybody that's been participating with us. Can't do it without you guys. There's a lot of folks on this slide that, you know, most of these folks have helped out more than once. They've been dedicated volunteers. We appreciate each and every one of them. And we want to see you come out and get involved if you're listening to this and you're encouraged. Love to teach you about the resource, love to teach you about what we're doing. And hopefully we can make a difference. And with that said, we've got the Facebook page up where hopefully you found this recording, and looking forward to developing a management plan and helping to put quality data in the hands of someone like Hunter Roop, who's our biologist on the river, is what we're after. As anglers, and that's me, as an angler for the last 25 years, I've always speculated and wondered what should we do in regards to protecting Chattahoochee bass, protecting shoal bass. What should we do? What is really happening? And that's where teaming up with the biologists, the folks that are making those decisions, getting them the data they need. And then it's time to just back off and let Hunter and Brian and Chad discuss what they feel like is best. And they're going to develop a management plan working with folks like Andrew People or Brandon Peoples, Andrew Taylor, Marty Hamill, Steve Salmons, Tim Bonvecchio. There's a lot of folks that are talking about this on the regular, really concerned, really passionate about protecting the resource, protecting the species. That's the kind of folks that we want, all those minds that we've got put together to just sit and talk and develop a management plan based on real-time data that we have. And whenever there's a need for more data, I feel like this project is very important because it connects anglers directly to that stream where you're getting updates now about what is happening with the science. What are folks doing? What do they need you to do? And what does all this mean as far as protecting the resource? So, like I said, we're going to put it in the hands of the folks that are paid to make those decisions every day. And it's our job to encourage them, to respect them, and to help them get the data they need. So if you'd like to help out and volunteer, we'd love to have you. Definitely want to thank Vance Crane. I think we just put in an application for another $200,000 of watershed protection measures, and hopefully that'll come through. We've got a committee going locally to put together some more grant applications to do more watershed restoration and protection, more stormwater projects, just a lot more coming down the road as we get education out there, we get more momentum. Hopefully we'll see more and more fish and more habitat protected. And that's the whole goal of the project. So if you have questions, you can send me an email. You can link up on the Facebook page. We'd love to have you. And thank y'all for paying attention.